Two broken
Attention!
souls met where mercy had almost run out. A battle-scarred German shepherd left behind in a frost-covered shelter. Eyes dull and waiting for the end. And an Australian soldier who had seen too much. Driving her old ute through the same winter dawn. Searching for a reason to keep going. She wasn't there to save anyone. But when the dog lifted one trembling paw and touched her bare hand, something inside both of them came back to life. What followed wasn't training. It was grace. And it will remind you that even shattered hearts can learn to trust again. Before we begin, tell me where you are watching from. Drop your country in the comments below. The snow in Osprey's Rest never truly melted. It only learned to hide beneath the early spring sunlight, glinting faintly along the edge of the blue gum forest that framed the town. The sanctuary sat where the sealed road gave up and turned to gravel. Its old wooden gate leaning slightly to one side. A faded sign read Blue Gum Rescue Sanctuary. It looked less like a facility and more like an aging farmhouse with stubborn courage. The kind of place that refused to give up just because life got hard. Kira Lawson parked her ute near the fence, the engine ticking in the cold. She stayed inside for a long minute, staring at the breath fogging her windscreen. The silence pressed in. She'd always hated silence. After years in the army, silence meant something was about to explode. She finally opened the door, boots crunching through frost. Kira was 39, broad-shouldered, and built from years of training that refused to leave her body even after war had. Her short, dark brown hair carried faint streaks of grey at the temples, and her jaw was set with a hard line. Her face had the kind of calm that wasn't peace. It was survival. There were faint scars near her left ear, reminders of an explosion that had ended her last deployment. Her eyes, steel blue, carried the kind of distance that came from watching too many things burn. The sanctuary's door creaked open before she could knock. Sharon O'Connell stood framed in the doorway, her figure small but steady. She was 66, her hair silver white, tied back with a rubber band that had seen better days. Wrinkles mapped years of kindness rather than age. And her eyes, grey as a winter sky, held an unspoken warmth. She wore a thick wool cardigan the colour of oatmeal and jeans tucked into mud-stained Blundstone boots. "You must be Kira Lawson," she said, her voice low and measured. "The group in Hobart said you were looking for something quiet." Kira nodded. "Quiet works." Sharon stepped aside and motioned her in. The inside smelled of straw, soap, and the faint musk of animals. "Can't offer much pay," she said, closing the door behind her. "But I can promise no one here cares where you've been. Only that you show up. That's all I'm good for these days," Kira murmured, half to herself. Sharon studied her, seeing what others might miss, the hesitation behind her calm, the restlessness in her stance. "I think you're good for more than you believe, Ms. Lawson, but I'll let the dogs be the judge." They walked through a narrow hallway lined with photographs, rescued animals. Kids holding kittens, Sharon decades younger, beside a German shepherd wearing a therapy vest. The sound of barking grew louder toward the back, a chorus of life that felt raw but alive. "There's one," she said, her tone shifting. "You'll hear about him sooner or later. Ranger, 6 years old, German shepherd, ex-military K9, came to us from an old contractor who couldn't handle him anymore." Kira slowed her pace. "What's the story?" Sharon hesitated, pulling her cardigan tighter. "Aggression, trauma, 3 handlers, none lasted more than a week. He doesn't let anyone touch him. He's been in that back pen for 6 months. Some days he just stares at the gate like he's waiting for someone who's not coming." She looked up at her. "I'm not asking you to fix him, Kira, just feed him, keep the others safe, that's all." Kira nodded, but a flicker passed behind her eyes. A shepherd, military, she had worked with dogs like that before. Loyal to a fault, shaped by discipline, broken by loss, understood. Outside, the sun slipped lower, casting long blue shadows over the frosty ground. As they stepped into the open yard, a young woman was taking photos near the fence. She was in her early 30s, tall and slim, wrapped in a tan coat and scarf. Her chestnut hair glowed auburn under the dying light. Sharon waved her over. "Kira, this is my granddaughter, Chloe. She's back from Melbourne, says she's writing about the people who stayed behind when everyone else moved away." Chloe smiled faintly, adjusting the camera strap on her shoulder. "It's for a feature series. My editor thinks small towns are the last honest mirrors of Australia." Her voice was calm, with that mix of confidence and curiosity typical of someone who looks at the world through a lens. "You're the new caretaker?" "Just helping out," Kira said. Her eyes studied Kira briefly. Posture too straight, movements too precise. "You were military?" Kira hesitated. "Used to be." She nodded softly. "I thought so. You move like someone still listening for orders." Sharon interrupted with a chuckle. Don't scare her off, Chloe, she's only just arrived. They parted ways at the kennel yard. The air inside was colder, metallic. Dozens of cages lined the walls, each occupied by eyes that followed every sound. Kira moved quietly, her steps instinctively soft, until Sharon stopped in front of the last pen. Ranger was there. The dog stood tall, even in stillness, black and tan coat thick but unkempt, muscles taut under scars that ran along his flank. One ear bent slightly at the tip, likely from an old injury. His eyes, amber and sharp, locked onto Kira immediately. There was intelligence there, but also exhaustion, the kind of gaze that calculated distance, threat, and memory all at once. He doesn't bark much, Sharon said softly, just watches. Kira crouched slowly, the cold seeping through her jeans. She didn't reach out, just looked. Ranger's breathing deepened, the steady rhythm of a soldier's caution. For a long minute, neither moved. The air between them felt alive, charged with something both old and familiar. Kira saw the tremor in the dog's front leg, the faint twitch of muscle near the scar across its muzzle. She knew that language: fear, defiance, loyalty confused by loss. You've seen things too, huh? She whispered. Ranger's ears twitched. A low growl began, then faded. His body stiffened, but his eyes didn't leave Kira's. They just changed, the kind of shift you only see when recognition flickers between broken beings. Sharon exhaled quietly behind her. Well, I'll be, she said under her breath. He's never let anyone that close. Kira didn't speak. She simply stayed there, holding that gaze until the dog's breathing slowed. Then, without warning, Ranger sat down. A single sound of claws against concrete echoed in the stillness. Kira felt something stir inside, something she thought the desert and the years had buried. Behind her, Sharon's voice was almost a whisper. He remembers something, or someone. She rose slowly, giving the dog one last nod before stepping back. Ranger didn't lunge, didn't growl. He simply watched as Kira walked away. The last thing she saw before turning off the lights was those amber eyes following her. Steady and knowing, as if both woman and dog had just stumbled upon the first fragile thread of healing. Outside, the wind had softened, carrying the faint scent of eucalyptus through the cold. For the first time in years, Kira didn't mind the quiet. It didn't sound like danger anymore. It sounded like a beginning. Morning in Osprey's Rest came slowly, the light crawling through the gums as if reluctant to disturb the frost that clung to every branch. The sanctuary smelled of hay, soap, and the faint musk of wet fur. For Kira Lawson, mornings here were quieter than any battlefield she had known. She rose early, more out of habit than rest, her mind still wired for orders that never came. Sharon had assigned her to the feeding rounds and basic maintenance. It was simple work, fixing fences, cleaning pens, hauling feed, but it kept her hands busy, which was all she'd wanted. She didn't talk much to the other volunteers, a couple of retired locals, who treated her with polite curiosity. Kira's focus stayed on the animals, especially the one behind the last gate. Ranger, the German shepherd, watched her every morning from the same spot in his kennel. Sitting motionless like a statue carved from old memory. 6 years old, lean but strong, his black and tan coat had regained a faint sheen from proper feeding, though the scars along his flank remained like old maps of violence. His eyes were sharp amber, the kind that saw through walls and hesitation. He never barked when Kira approached, never lunged, just stared with an intensity that made others uneasy. But Kira wasn't others. She understood that kind of watchfulness. It wasn't hate, it was survival. Sharon joined her that morning with her usual thermos of coffee. You handle the cold better than most, she said. Most people complain about it by day 3. I've had worse climates, Kira replied, crouching by Ranger's pen. Sharon's gaze softened. That one's been waiting for something. Or someone, longer than any of us know. He won't eat unless the food bowl is placed just so. Won't sleep until the lights are off. She paused. You talked to him yet? Kira shrugged. Dogs don't need words, they just need truth. Sharon studied her, recognizing that quiet authority that soldiers carried even after they hung up their uniforms. She'd met her kind before, those who had returned from war but never quite made it home. Truth's a good start, she said finally, just don't expect him to forgive the world overnight. As the morning shifted into day, Chloe arrived with her camera bag slung over one shoulder. The steam from her breath turned to ribbons in the cold air. Her wavy auburn hair was tied in a loose ponytail, and her eyes were alive with curiosity. She carried the restless energy of someone who always had to know why. After spending the morning at the local pub, interviewing 2 old veterans for her article, she had come back to get a few more photographs. She found Kira fixing a latch near the storage shed. Hey, she called softly, not wanting to startle her. Mind if I take a few shots around the place? Kira looked up briefly, her tone neutral. You don't need my permission. Shaz runs this place. I asked her, Chloe said, stepping closer. She said you'd be here. I figured you'd rather know before I start pointing a camera. Kira nodded, tightening the bolt. Appreciate it. For a moment, she lingered, unsure if conversation was welcome. You know, she said after a pause. One of the diggers I interviewed this morning talked about his dog. Said the dog kept him from doing something final. He said, an animal carries the part of us that still wants to live. Kira stopped working, her eyes narrowing slightly, but not in anger, more like a woman hearing an echo. Is not wrong, she said quietly. Sometimes that's all it takes. Something to remind you the world's not done with you yet. Chloe studied her then, not with pity, but with curiosity, trying to see past the armor in her tone. You sound like someone who knows that firsthand. Kira gave a thin smile. Maybe, or maybe I'm just good at feeding dogs. Chloe let it go. She had learned not to press soldiers. They opened up when they were ready. Never before. As she turned to leave, she aimed her camera at the far kennel and froze. Ranger was watching Kira again. Through the lens, she could see the subtle shift in the dog's eyes, like recognition brushing across the edge of instinct. That afternoon, the sky dimmed earlier than usual, clouds gathering low and grey. Sharon left early to visit a neighbor who'd just lost her husband. You two close up, she told Kira before leaving. And keep an eye on Ranger. He's been restless since the wind picked up. The wind howled through the rafters, carrying a low whistle that made the dog stir. Kira moved slowly between the rows, checking latches and blankets. When she reached the end, Ranger was pacing, his claws clicked against concrete, tail low but twitching. Easy, mate, Kira said softly, the sound of her voice, low, steady, calm, cut through the noise like a thread of warmth. Ranger froze, head turning toward her. The dog's eyes widened slightly, pupils shifting. Kira stayed still, repeating the words again, quieter this time. Easy, mate, you're okay. The transformation was subtle, but real. Ranger's shoulders relaxed, his breathing slowed, and after a moment, he lowered his head, not in submission, but in recognition. Kira crouched, elbows resting on her knees, letting the silence fill the space between them. In that stillness, fragments of memory drifted back. Dust, explosions, a desert sky the color of rust, a dog barking once, a warning, then silence. Kira blinked it away, focusing on the present. She whispered again, almost to herself, you're safe now. Behind her, the door creaked. Chloe stood there, camera forgotten at her side. I didn't mean to interrupt, she said softly. I came to drop off some notes for Shaz. Kira didn't turn. You're fine. Chloe stepped closer, keeping her voice low. You talk to him like you've done this before. Kira gave a half laugh. Old habit. Chloe watched the way Ranger's ears shifted at the sound of Kira's voice. He listens to you, she said. No one else gets that. Maybe he's just tired of being angry, Kira replied. Or maybe he knows I get it. When she looked at Kira again, she saw not the soldier she'd imagined, but a woman quietly piecing herself back together. Kira, she said after a pause, when you're ready, I'd like to interview you for the article. Not about the war, about what comes after. Kira hesitated. I'm not sure anyone cares about that part. Maybe not, Chloe said, smiling faintly, but they should. Outside, the snow began to fall harder, thick flakes swirling under the floodlights. Kira turned back to Ranger. The dog had settled down, lying against the gate, watching her with weary curiosity. Something in the animal's stillness drew her closer. Kira picked up a rubber ball from the floor, likely dropped from another pen, and rolled it gently toward the bars. The ball stopped midway. Ranger's eyes followed it, then flicked up to Kira's face. Go on, she whispered, it's yours. For a long time, nothing happened. Then slowly, Ranger stretched out his paw and nudged the ball forward, just enough for it to roll back to Kira's boot. The gesture was small, almost nothing at all, but Kira felt it like a heartbeat in her chest. She looked at the dog, who now sat quietly, tail brushing the floor once, twice. She crouched again, voice low. We'll take it slow, partner, one day at a time. Chloe watched from the doorway, arms folded, a soft smile playing at her lips. In that cold, dim sanctuary, something fragile had shifted. The soldier, who had stopped believing in second chances, and the dog, who had stopped trusting, had just met halfway. The thaw came late that year. Even by mid-March, frost still clung to the corners of windows, and the blue gum forest held the ghostly white of winter. Kira Lawson had grown used to the quiet rhythm of the sanctuary, the slow mornings of feeding, The evenings when the sky dimmed over the ridgeline like a curtain lowering on a worn-out play. She didn't speak much, but something about the routine had begun to settle inside her. The dogs trusted her now, or at least tolerated her presence. And Sharon had learned that silence for Kira was a kind of prayer. That morning, she was in the training yard, a patch of frozen dirt surrounded by chain-link fencing. She had volunteered to work with the dogs that struggled with obedience. The ones too nervous or stubborn for the volunteers. Ranger sat at the far end of the field, watching. The shepherd's coat gleamed in the cold sunlight, black and tan, shimmering like ink over firelight. He no longer barked or lunged when people passed, but he still kept his distance, alert, listening, waiting. Kira leaned on the fence, arms crossed, her breath a faint fog. Try working with one of the calmer ones first, Sharon called from behind her. She stood with a clipboard, bundled in her heavy coat, her silver hair tucked under a wool beanie. Kira gave a small nod. I want to see how he reacts to commands first. Sharon frowned. Be careful, he's unpredictable when reminded of training. Kira stepped into the enclosure. Slow and steady, Ranger tensed but didn't move. Kira spoke softly. Sit. The dog tilted his head. Unresponsive. She tried again. Stay. Still nothing. Then, without thinking, without any conscious decision, Kira said, Blibe. The word fell from her mouth like muscle memory. Deep and commanding, the way a digger's voice used to sound before the war stripped it of certainty. To her shock, Ranger obeyed instantly. The shepherd froze, muscles tightening, then lowered himself into a sit. Perfect posture, head up, eyes fixed on Kira, awaiting further orders. Kira's heart stuttered. She hadn't spoken German since deployment. Blibe was the field command for stay, used only by handlers in combat. Her breath caught in her throat. Good boy, she murmured automatically, her voice trembling. Sharon stepped closer, bewildered. What did you just say? Kira didn't answer immediately. She crouched down, staring into the shepherd's eyes. Ranger's ears flicked forward, tail motionless, his gaze sharp and expectant. For a moment, it wasn't a rescue yard. It was a desert, heat, sand, and the deafening roar of something collapsing in the distance. She smelled the burning oil and dust again, felt the static before an explosion. Sharon's hand touched her shoulder, grounding her. Kira. Kira blinked, and the vision faded. The yard returned to cold daylight. That word, she said quietly, was part of his training. He shouldn't have remembered it. Not after all this time. Sharon looked between her and the dog. You mean military training? Kira nodded slowly. It's a handler's command. It's specific. Her jaw tightened. I used it years ago. Sharon's brow furrowed. You trained dogs like him? Kira didn't look up. Something like that. She didn't press. She'd learned to let war speak on its own timeline. Later that afternoon, Chloe returned to the sanctuary. Camera slung across her shoulder. Notebook tucked under her arm. Her auburn hair glowed in the late light. Cheeks flushed pink from the wind. She greeted Sharon at the gate with her usual warmth. I got the draft for the article, she said, but I want to cross-check something first. There's a name that came up in an old defense brief. Sharon smiled wearily. You and your digging, what did you find this time? Something strange. Chloe pulled a folded page from her bag. There was a classified mission. Operation North June, back in Afghanistan almost 7 years ago. Most of it's redacted, but one line mentions a handler, Lawson, and AK-9 unit listed as missing in action. No recovery record. Sharon froze. Lawson? Chloe nodded. It could be a coincidence. Lawson isn't exactly a rare name. But, she hesitated, her eyes softening, when I saw the footage of Kira and Ranger in the yard. I noticed how that dog moved. It wasn't random, it was trained precision. I think they've met before, even if neither of them knows it yet. Sharon sighed, rubbing her temples. If that's true, you'll have to tread lightly. Whatever happened to her over there? She's only just beginning to breathe again. Chloe nodded solemnly. I know, I'm not here to expose her. Shaz, I just want to understand. The older woman smiled faintly. Understanding's the beginning of healing. Just don't mistake curiosity for kindness. They don't always live in the same house. As evening settled, Kira sat alone in the staff cabin, a modest wooden structure that smelled faintly of cedar and smoke. The single lamp cast warm light across the table where an old leather notebook lay open. It was her field journal, one she hadn't touched in years. She turned the pages, each filled with coordinates, short entries, half-erased memories. Then she found the one that stopped her cold. Unit K9 Handler Division. Designation R17. Status, active, awaiting deployment. Her throat tightened. R17, her penmanship, her handwriting, She traced the letters with her finger. She remembered now, the shepherd pup she'd trained from 6 months old. Fearless, stubborn, loyal, a dog that refused to quit even when the sky fell down around them. She whispered, "Ranger." The sound of the name filled the room like a confession. Outside, wind rattled the shutters. Ranger's faint bark echoed from the kennels. A sharp sound carried through the cold air. Kira's chest ached with something that was not pain, but recognition. The connection wasn't coincidence. The dog she had once commanded, once lost in the chaos of war, had somehow found his way back. Broken, but alive. The next morning, the sky over Osprey's Rest blushed gold as the first light hit the snow. Kira stood by the fence. Ranger beside her, quiet and alert. The dog nudged her hand once, tail flicking. Kira managed a smile. "You still remember, huh?" she said softly. "You always were the stubborn one." She didn't notice Chloe standing behind her. Her camera lowered. She had decided against taking the picture. Some moments, she realized, weren't meant to be captured. They were meant to be protected. When Kira later returned to her cabin, she reopened the notebook, staring at the initials carved faintly on the corner of the last page. R17. She rested her palm over it and murmured, barely audible, "You made it home, buddy, and I still owe you for that." Outside, the snow finally began to melt, dripping from the eaves in slow, rhythmic beats, like the world was learning to breathe again. The week after the discovery in Kira's old field notebook passed with the kind of fragile calm that comes before a thaw. Snow still blanketed the ridges surrounding Osprey's Rest, though the edges were beginning to soften into grey slush. Every morning, mist drifted across the forest, and the faint smell of pine and melting ice carried through the air. For the first time in years, Kira felt drawn outside by something other than duty. She began walking Ranger beyond the sanctuary grounds, following the narrow trail that wound down toward a wooden bridge spanning a small, half-frozen stream. The bridge creaked beneath their weight, old planks lined with frost. Ranger hesitated the first few days, claws scraping the wood, body trembling. Each sharp crack of ice made him flinch, ears flat, tail tucked. Kira didn't rush him. She waited beside the dog, one gloved hand resting lightly against Ranger's neck. "It's all right," she said softly, "we're not back there anymore." The dog's breath puffed out in white clouds. For a moment, Kira thought of the desert heat again, the sandstorms, the thunder of mortars, the feel of fear humming in her chest. She recognized that tremor in Ranger. It was the same one that used to haunt her own hands when the world went quiet. Every day they crossed a little farther. By the end of the week, Ranger could make it halfway before stopping, looking back at Kira for reassurance. "We'll get there," Kira whispered, "one step at a time." At the sanctuary, Sharon O'Connell had been preparing for what she called the Open Day, a weekend event where town folk could visit, bring donations, and maybe adopt. The sanctuary hadn't hosted one since before the pandemic. Sharon, with her sharp grey eyes and stubborn optimism, believed it was time. "The town needs to see hope walking on 4 legs again," she said as she pinned handmade signs along the fence. Chloe offered to help organize, turning the event into part of her article. Her energy filled every corner she moved through, camera in one hand, notebook in the other. Her hair escaped its ponytail constantly, catching the light as she spoke to volunteers. Kira sometimes found herself watching her from a distance, admiring how she could talk to strangers with a warmth that never felt forced. She reminded Kira of sunlight on a frozen river, soft but determined to break through. The morning of the event dawned clear but bitterly cold. Utes and cars lined the gravel road outside the sanctuary. Families with children bundled in thick coats wandered the enclosures, their laughter cutting through the barking chorus. Sharon directed people with the ease of someone who had commanded far tougher situations, while Kira stood near Ranger's pen, making sure no one got too close. Children pressed their faces to the fence, pointing. "Is he mean?" a boy asked, tugging at his mother's sleeve. Kira crouched beside them. "He's scared," she said simply. "Sometimes when someone's been hurt, they act tough until they feel safe again." The mother smiled faintly, appreciating her patience. The boy nodded, wide-eyed, and whispered, "Like a superhero after a bad mission?" Kira chuckled, "Something like that." Nearby, Chloe captured the exchange with her camera. Through her lens, she caught the way Kira's guarded expression softened when she spoke to the child, the faint warmth breaking through the soldier's composure. She lowered the camera, thoughtful. By noon, the sanctuary hummed with movement. Local vendors had set up a small stall selling hot cocoa and lamingtons, and Sharon moved among the crowd like a proud matriarch. An old man named Walter, a retired truck driver with a weathered face and a missing front tooth, offered to fix one of the broken heaters. "Can't have the pups freezing their tails off." he said, grinning. His kindness reminded Kira that gentleness still existed in places untouched by war. As the afternoon light thinned, snow began to fall again. Soft and lazy, a group of schoolchildren were gathered near Ranger's pen. Among them was a little girl named Abby, about 7, small and fair-haired, wearing a red coat and mismatched mittens. She had a gap in her front teeth and a way of talking to animals as if they were her friends. "Hi, doggy," she whispered, slipping a small cookie through the fence. Ranger didn't move at first, only sniffed. Sharon called out from across the yard, "Careful, sweetheart, he's still learning to trust." But Abby only smiled. "That's okay, I'm patient." She turned her head slightly and stepped back to wave at Sharon. And that's when her boot caught a patch of ice. She slipped, falling backward with a startled cry. The small crowd gasped. The sound was sharp, like the snap of a rifle shot. Ranger's reaction was instantaneous. The shepherd surged forward, muscles coiled, claws scraping the concrete. Kira barely had time to open the gate before the dog darted past her, bounding across the yard toward the child. For a terrifying moment, people froze. Sharon shouted, Chloe dropped her camera, and a father reached for his daughter. But Ranger didn't attack. He skidded to a halt beside Abby and positioned himself between her and the icy ground. Front legs braced, body blocking her from harm. The little girl sat blinking, stunned but unharmed. Kira ran over, breath misting. She slowed as she neared, speaking low. "Easy, boy, good job." Ranger stood rigid for another heartbeat, then looked back at Kira. The dog's chest heaved, his ears flicked, and slowly, hesitantly, his tail wagged once. Abby giggled and patted his shoulder. "See, he's brave." Laughter rippled through the crowd, easing the tension. Sharon exhaled, pressing a hand over her heart. "Lord above," she murmured, "that dog just made me 10 years older." Chloe had picked up her camera again but didn't click. She knew the picture forming in front of her wasn't one to freeze. It was one to remember. She saw the look on Kira's face, quiet pride mixed with awe. Later, after the visitors had gone and the last of the cocoa had cooled, Kira sat on the porch steps outside the kennel. Ranger lay beside him, head resting on her boots. The sky had gone pale with twilight, the world tinted blue and gold. "You did good today," Kira said softly. "Scared half the town, but you did good." Ranger's tail brushed the wooden step. Kira smiled faintly. "Guess we're both learning how to cross our bridges." From the doorway, Sharon leaned against the frame, her breath forming little clouds. "He's not the only one," she said gently. "You're crossing, too, whether you know it or not." Kira didn't answer. She looked out toward the dark silhouette of the bridge beyond the trees. The snow there shimmered faintly under the last light. She thought of all the times she'd stopped halfway across, afraid to move forward. Maybe healing wasn't about leaving the past behind. Maybe it was about learning to walk beside it. She reached down, resting a hand lightly on Ranger's neck. "Come on, partner," she whispered. "We've still got a long way to go." And together, beneath the falling snow, they stood and faced the quiet bridge waiting in the distance. The snow had returned that evening, falling in a hush that softened even the town's smallest sounds. Osprey's Rest lay wrapped in white, the world muted except for the occasional creak of ice on rooftops. Kira Lawson was finishing the late rounds at the sanctuary, tightening the kennel latches as the dogs settled into uneasy sleep. Ranger lay curled in his pen, head resting between his paws, ears twitching at every passing wind. Kira had noticed lately that the shepherd slept lighter than most dogs, as if rest was a luxury he hadn't quite earned. Sharon had gone home early after a long day at the vet clinic, and Chloe was downtown covering a winter fundraiser for the local fire brigade. The sanctuary felt empty without their presence. Kira moved through the dim corridors with only the sound of her boots on concrete. She was thinking about turning in when the first wail split the night. It came from the direction of town. The long, metallic cry of a siren, sharp, rising, then falling, echoing through the hills. The sound sliced through the snow-heavy silence like a blade. Ranger's body went rigid, his head shot up, ears pricked, eyes wide with panic. The second siren blared, closer this time, accompanied by flashing red that painted the snow in violent bursts. "Hey," Kira said softly, stepping closer. "It's all right." But it wasn't. The sound wasn't just a siren to Ranger. It was memory. The shepherd bolted upright, claws scraping the floor, tail tucked tight. Then, with a guttural bark that came from someplace deep and terrified, he lunged at the gate, snapping the lock clean off. Before Kira could grab him, the dog was gone, a dark blur in the white storm. Kira's pulse hammered. "Ranger," she shouted, already running for the door. The cold hit her like a wall as she burst outside. Snow swirled in sheets, the wind tearing through her jacket. She could barely see more than a few feet ahead. The sirens were louder now, the sound bouncing between the hills, distant yet overwhelming, the kind of noise that made every nerve remember war. She sprinted down the trail, boots crunching through the drifts, following the faint paw prints that zigzagged toward town. Her breath came in sharp bursts, fogging the frozen air. Somewhere ahead, a dog barked frantically, Ranger's voice full of fear and confusion. By the time Kira reached the bridge, her lungs burned. She saw movement in the snow. Ranger, standing halfway across, trembling, eyes wide, every muscle taut, the red glow from the sirens flickered against his fur like firelight. He looked lost, cornered by ghosts. Ranger, Kira called, stopping at the foot of the bridge. The dog's head snapped toward her, but the sirens wailed again, and Ranger flinched backward, claws scraping the wood. The old boards creaked under his weight. One wrong step, and he'd fall into the icy water below. Kira forced herself to breathe. The soldier in her, the woman who used to give orders, took over. She stepped forward, steady and slow, ignoring the wind that stung her eyes. "It's me, buddy," she said quietly. "You're safe. You hear me? You're safe." Ranger let out a low, uncertain whine. His body quivered, tail down, head low. The sirens kept screaming. The sound twisted something deep in Kira's chest. She knew that panic, the helplessness of being trapped between memory and reality. She drew in a breath and shouted, voice deep, commanding, instinctive, "Blibe." The word cut through the night like a flare. Ranger froze, muscles locking. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Then Kira saw recognition flicker in the shepherd's eyes. The old training, the bond buried under years of distance and pain. "Good boy," Kira whispered, stepping closer. "It's all right now." The wind howled through the trees. Ranger whimpered once, then began to move, slow, hesitant steps across the slick bridge. When he reached Kira, the dog pressed his head into the woman's chest. Trembling violently, Kira dropped to her knees, wrapping both arms around him. "Easy, easy," she murmured, her voice breaking. The dog's heartbeat pounded against her ribs, fast and desperate, until finally, it began to slow. Somewhere behind them, the glow of fire lit the low clouds. The old warehouse near the edge of town had gone up in flames. Fire trucks crowded the street, lights spinning. Kira could hear shouts carried on the wind. She stayed where she was, holding Ranger as snow melted on their clothes, the two of them framed by the cold and the distant firelight. Half an hour later, Chloe arrived, camera gear slung over her shoulder, her breath quick and visible. Her coat was dusted with snow, cheeks flushed red from the run. She had been covering the warehouse fire when she heard from Sharon that Kira had gone after the dog. She spotted them by the bridge, woman and dog, both soaked and silent under the falling snow. The scene struck her like something sacred. She didn't even think before pulling out her phone and recording. The footage was simple, a soldier kneeling in the snow, whispering to a shaking dog under flashing red lights. The sirens wailed, but neither moved. When she uploaded it to the local news site later that night, she titled it, "The Night the Dog Came Home." By morning, the clip had spread through town. The comments poured in, people who recognized Kira from the diner or the hardware store, old veterans who saw in her something they'd felt but never said. One message read, "That wasn't a rescue. That was redemption." Sharon watched the video in her office, a hand pressed to her mouth. She wiped her eyes before heading out to find them. She discovered Kira sitting on an overturned crate inside the sanctuary storage barn. Ranger lying beside her on a blanket. The fire's distant glow flickered through the gaps in the wood, casting warm stripes across their faces. "You should have seen it," Sharon said softly. "Half the town's talking about you too." Kira looked up, her face lined with exhaustion, but calm. "We just got lost for a while," she said. "Found our way back." Ranger stirred, lifting his head. His eyes were softer now, the sharp edge of fear dulled by trust. Kira reached down and brushed his fur gently. "We're all right," she whispered, almost to herself. "We're not fighting anymore." Outside, the last siren faded into the night, leaving only the sound of wind moving through the trees. The snow had finally begun to retreat from Osprey's Rest. Patches of green showed timidly along the fence lines, and water trickled through the ditches where ice once ruled. The air was damp, the scent of thaw and eucalyptus replacing winter's steel edge. For Kira Lawson, each day felt lighter, though the quiet still carried the echo of something unfinished. The video of her and Ranger had long stopped trending, but people in town still waved when she walked by. The town didn't just see a woman and a dog anymore. They saw a story about second chances. One grey morning, Sharon arrived at the sanctuary carrying a small stack of mail tucked under her arm. Her wool coat was flecked with drizzle, her cheeks ruddy from the chill. She handed Kira a plain white envelope stamped with the Australian Army crest. "This one's for you," she said softly. "Came certified." Kira frowned. She hadn't received anything from the Army in years. The envelope was crisp, official, the kind of paper that carried weight. She took it to her small office, a wooden desk, one chair, one lamp, and sat down. Her hands hesitated for a moment before tearing the flap open. Inside was a single letter on Department of Defense letterhead. She began to read aloud, voice low. Staff Sergeant Kira Lawson, Australian Army, retired, following a recent audit and data recovery of inactive K9 Division records. The K9 designated R17, Ranger, has been positively identified through subdermal DNA chip correlation. The record confirms assignment under your command during Operation North June, Afghanistan, 2016. The asset was listed as missing in action following detonation of an improvised device resulting in loss of contact with your unit. This communication serves as acknowledgement of recovery and recognition of service connection. You are hereby granted authority to assume permanent custody, if desired. Signed, Lieutenant Commander Charles Vance, Australian Army K9 Liaison. Kira stared at the letter for a long time. Her jaw tightened, and her throat felt raw. The paper shook slightly in her hands. R17, she whispered, the number she had carved into her old notebook. The number she thought she'd never see again. Ranger had been her dog, her partner, before the explosion that buried part of their unit under collapsing concrete. Kira had been pulled out alive. The rest hadn't. She'd spent years convincing herself Ranger hadn't survived either, because it was easier than wondering if the dog had died alone. Now the truth sat in black ink before her. Ranger had lived, carried forward by instinct, memory, and some unexplainable tether between them. She exhaled slowly and folded the letter. For the first time in years, her eyes burned, not from grief, but from release. That afternoon, Chloe returned to the sanctuary with her notebook and voice recorder. Her coat was a pale grey trench, tied loosely at the waist, and her chestnut hair had grown longer, brushing her shoulders. There was a quiet confidence about her now, the kind that came from writing about real pain and surviving it. She greeted Sharon first, exchanging a few easy words, then approached Kira as she stood by the fence, Ranger at her side. "I heard about the letter," she said gently. Kira nodded, eyes still on the dog. "Yeah, turns out he wasn't just another rescue." "I know," Chloe replied softly. "I asked permission to read the report. They said he was yours. That you trained him." Kira's voice was low. "Feels strange, like meeting a ghost and realizing it's been alive all along." They walked along the fence together. The sound of melting snow dripped from the eaves, and birds chirped tentatively in the gums. Chloe switched off her recorder and slipped it into her coat pocket. "Kira," she said, "I was supposed to ask you a few questions for the follow-up article. But I think what I really want to know isn't about Ranger. It's about you." Kira gave a half smile. "That's dangerous territory." "Maybe," Chloe said, smiling back, "but you told me once. Dogs don't need words, just truth. I think people aren't that different." For a long while, Kira didn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady but edged with pain. "That day in Afghanistan, we were clearing an abandoned compound. Intel said it was empty. It wasn't. When the first blast went off, I lost my hearing for a few seconds. Everything went white. Ranger was trained to pull me back if something felt wrong. But I waved him off. I thought I knew better. I sent him ahead. Then the second blast came." She paused, breath clouding the air. "I don't remember much after that. They said I was lucky. I never felt lucky. I kept thinking, if I hadn't given that order, maybe it would have been me, not them." Chloe listened silently, her eyes glistening. "Kira," she said softly, "you can't rewrite that moment, but you can decide what you do with what's left of it." Kira looked down at Ranger, who had pressed close against her leg. Amber eyes lifted in quiet loyalty. "I think he already decided for me," she murmured. Chloe smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what courage really is. Not facing death, but facing life again." They stood there in silence, the wind brushing through the gums. And for the first time in years, Kira didn't flinch at the sound. Later that evening, she found herself in Sharon's office. The fire crackled in the stove, filling the small space with warmth. Sharon sat behind her desk, glasses perched on her nose, reviewing paperwork. She looked up when Kira entered, the letter in her hand. "I've decided," she said simply. Sharon gestured toward the chair. "Sit down, soldier." Kira smiled faintly and obeyed. "The Army confirmed Ranger was mine. They're letting me sign for permanent custody." Sharon's eyes softened. About time someone made it official. Kira placed the document on the desk. Can you witness the signature? With honor, she said, sliding the form toward her. Kira took the pen, hesitated for a heartbeat, then signed, Handler, K. Lawson. The ink bled slightly into the paper. The letters dark and final. She handed it back to her and exhaled. Guess that makes us partners again. Sharon smiled. You were never not partners. Outside, the sun had slipped below the horizon, leaving the sky streaked with violet and gold. Kira stepped out with Ranger beside her. The dog leaned against her leg for a moment. The way soldiers lean on each other when words run out. Kira looked toward the horizon. The faint silhouette of the bridge barely visible through the mist. She reached down, scratching behind Ranger's ear. We made it home, she whispered, both of us. The shepherd tilted his head and let out a quiet huff. As if in agreement, together, they walked down the path, the last light of day falling softly on the snow that remained. Two survivors, learning finally that coming home isn't about where you end up. It's about who's still beside you when the fighting stops. Spring returned to Osprey's Rest like a long exhale. The last traces of snow melted into soft rivulets that trickled down through the gum roots, feeding the ground that had been frozen for months. The air smelled of damp earth and thawed life. On the edge of town, the old Blue Gum Rescue looked different now. The faded wooden sign had been replaced with a freshly painted one that read, Osprey's Rest Therapy Center. Beneath it, a smaller line read, For Veterans and Their Companions. Kira Lawson stood by the fence that morning, the soft breeze tugging at her green-grey army jacket. She had traded the restless silence of survival for something quieter, but fuller. Ranger sat beside her, posture straight and attentive, his black and tan coat gleaming in the sunlight. He looked healthier now, scars fading beneath the fur, eyes brighter. When the wind rustled through the trees, he no longer flinched. Sharon Hart, still as steady and determined as ever, came walking up the path with a clipboard pressed against her chest. Her grey hair was tied back neatly, and her deep blue eyes carried a quiet satisfaction. Looks like we made it, soldier, she said, stopping beside her. The funding came through this morning. Kira turned to her, a slow smile forming. So, it's official now. Sharon nodded. Official as it gets. The article Chloe wrote hit over 1 million views in 48 hours. Donations came in from half the country. Veterans, families, even a few rescue units. People want this place to be real. Kira looked out toward the yard where workers were fixing the fence, painting kennels, and clearing the trail toward the riverbank. They'll get their wish, she murmured. Sharon chuckled, tapping her clipboard. You realize you're the star of the story, right? The digger who came home twice. That's what people are calling you. Kira grimaced lightly. I'm not a hero, Shaz. No, she said softly. You're something rarer. You're a survivor who decided to help others survive, too. That afternoon, the first of the new arrivals came in. A group of veterans from nearby counties, each bringing with them a dog that had been through its own kind of war. Among them was Marcus Hale, a tall African-American man in his early 40s, broad-shouldered with a quiet, tired dignity. His left hand trembled faintly when he spoke, a reminder of shrapnel still embedded in his arm. Beside him trotted a small brown mixed-breed dog with a scar across its muzzle. Marcus approached Kira with a nod. He's called Scout, he said. Rescue picked him up behind a servo. He doesn't trust anyone. Kira crouched to meet the dog's gaze. Scout's tail was tucked, body low. Neither did I, she said quietly, offering her hand palm down. The dog sniffed cautiously, then took one hesitant step forward. You'll fit right in, Kira added, glancing up at Marcus. Marcus's face softened, the corners of his mouth twitching upward. Guess we both needed a place like this. Ranger observed from a distance. Head tilted, the shepherd had taken on a calm, mentoring presence since the fire. He followed Kira everywhere, alert but gentle, occasionally checking on the new dogs with a patient sniff or a wag of his tail. In the following weeks, the sanctuary transformed. Wooden benches appeared beneath the gum trees. The old barn was renovated into a warm, indoor training space filled with mats and soft light. The sound of barking no longer echoed with fear, but with play. Veterans worked side by side, laughing as they learned commands and rebuilt trust through repetition. The air was filled with the rhythm of healing. Slow, sometimes awkward, but real. Meanwhile, Chloe had been spending her days at the small desk in the corner of the staff room, typing furiously. Her chestnut hair caught the light from the window as she reviewed old notes and field interviews. She titled her article, The Light Beneath the Gums. It was less a story about soldiers or dogs, and more about what happens when two broken lives find the courage to mend together. When the piece went live on Australian Chronicle, it spread faster than she expected. Comments poured in from readers across the country. Veterans who said they cried. Families who said they understood their fathers or brothers better. Rescue workers offering to volunteer. News outlets called Sharon asking for interviews. The town mayor even stopped by. A short man named Dennis Clark with a round face and neatly combed silver hair, promising to help expand the center's outreach program. "It's funny," Chloe said one evening as she joined Kira by the riverbank, camera in hand. "I started writing to tell your story. But it turns out it's not really yours anymore. It belongs to everyone who's trying to start over." Kira smiled faintly. "Good, I've had enough of my story." Chloe turned to her, studying her face in the fading light, the faint scars near her jawline, the lines carved by years of sun and silence, the grey streaks in her short hair that made her look both older and stronger. "You look lighter," she said softly. "I am," Kira replied, watching Ranger wade into the shallow water nearby. "Guess healing doesn't always look like peace. Sometimes it just looks like learning to show up again." The golden dusk settled over the sanctuary. Birds skimmed across the river, and the scent of pine mixed with the faint hum of evening. Kira noticed Ranger standing ankle-deep in the water, looking back toward a small kennel at the edge of the clearing. Inside, a young German Shepherd puppy hesitated at the door, tail twitching nervously. "Go on," Kira whispered, nodding toward Ranger. Ranger turned, trotting up the slope, and gently nudged the pup's shoulder. The little one whined, then took a step toward the stream. Ranger waited patiently, head tilted, then stepped backward into the water again. After a long moment, the puppy followed, tentative at first, then splashing, barking in delight as his paws hit the cool current. Kira lifted her camera, but Chloe stopped her. "Don't," she said with a grin. "Some moments are meant to live, not be captured." Chloe lowered the camera slowly. "Then at least describe it for me." Kira watched as Ranger stood beside the small dog, nudging him forward every few steps, letting him learn the rhythm of trust. "Healing," she said quietly. "It spreads like light." Sharon, standing a few feet behind them with her clipboard, overheard and smiled. "Then we'll make sure this light never goes out." As twilight deepened and the river glimmered gold beneath the pines, Kira felt something inside her settle, a stillness she hadn't known in years. The sanctuary wasn't just reborn, so was she. Spring returned to Osprey's Rest softer this time, without the burden of melting grief. The wind carried the scent of pine sap and soil, the kind that promised new beginnings. At the heart of the sanctuary, beneath the tall evergreens, stood a newly built stone archway. Across its curve, engraved in bronze letters, were the words, "The Garden of Second Chances." It was small, quiet, and beautiful in its simplicity, a circle of life carved from the pain that once haunted this place. Kira Lawson stood near the edge of the path, wearing a light grey shirt rolled up to her elbows. The beard she once kept close-cropped had filled in slightly, streaked with silver that caught the sunlight. Her face had softened since the winter, a woman who had finally learned how to breathe again. Beside her, Ranger sat poised and calm, his black and tan fur shining in the morning light. The shepherd's once haunted eyes now glowed with something Kira hadn't seen in years. "Peace." Sharon O'Connell bustled about with her clipboard as usual, though her step had more bounce these days. Her once tired face seemed brighter beneath her straw hat, her grey hair pulled into a low ponytail. She stopped to adjust the ribbon near the memorial stone and muttered, "If these diggers can rebuild their lives, I can at least make sure the ribbon is straight." Chloe approached, her light blue dress fluttering in the breeze. Her hair, chestnut brown and loosely waved, caught the sun in threads of gold. She held a small notebook against her chest, though she had no plans to write today. Today she was part of the story, not the observer. She smiled when she saw Kira. "You look different," she said softly. Kira turned to her with an easy grin. "Better or worse?" "Like someone who finally unpacked the past," she replied. "Guess I had some help," Kira said, nodding toward Ranger, who wagged his tail once as if understanding. A few utes rolled into the dirt lot nearby. Veterans stepped out one by one, each accompanied by a dog. There was Marcus Hale, tall and broad-shouldered, his dark skin gleaming beneath the sun. He wore a navy jacket and carried a thermos of coffee in his good hand. Scout, his little brown mutt with a scarred muzzle, trotted faithfully beside him. "Morning, Lawson," Marcus said, raising the thermos like a toast. "Morning," Kira replied. "Looks like Scout's doing better." Marcus chuckled. "He sleeps through thunder now. I call that a victory." Behind him came two more visitors, Sergeant Linda Parrish and her dog, Bella. Linda was in her late 30s, a petite woman with cropped blonde hair and sharp, kind eyes. Her right leg was prosthetic, the metal joint gleaming beneath her jeans. Bella, a golden retriever with a missing ear, stayed pressed to her side. Wouldn't miss this for the world, Linda said as she joined them. Heard there'd be coffee and peace in equal measure. Sharon clapped her hands to get everyone's attention. All right, everyone, let's gather up. The crowd, 24 people and almost as many dogs, formed a loose circle around the memorial garden. The air was still, except for the occasional rustle of pine needles overhead. At the center stood a low stone plinth surrounded by tulips and small, carved paw prints. On the stone, a bronze plaque gleamed in the light. Chloe stepped forward, unfolding a small piece of paper. She looked at Kira before beginning, her voice clear but trembling slightly. This garden was built for all who've known loss and found their way through it. It stands for every soul that fought to live, whether on 2 feet or 4. She paused, letting the words breathe. And on this stone, we carved a promise: not every soldier comes home on 2 feet. The words hung in the air like a prayer. Around the circle, eyes filled with tears, Linda rested her hand on Bella's head. Marcus looked down at Scout, and Sharon covered her mouth, her eyes glistening. Kira felt something move deep within her chest. A release, quiet and profound. She looked at Ranger, who stared back at her with the unflinching loyalty that had survived everything between them. You came home, she whispered. When the brief silence ended, the group broke into gentle applause. It wasn't loud, but it carried the weight of shared understanding. After the ceremony, the veterans lingered, trading stories over coffee and laughter that sounded unforced for once. Sharon moved among them, her laughter ringing like the chime of glass. You see that, Kira? She said, nodding at the crowd. We used to have cages here. Now look at this. Families, laughter, life. You did that. Kira shook her head. We did that, all of us. As the morning wore on, the crowd began to thin. Some dogs dozed beneath the trees. Others played in the open field near the fence. Chloe sat on the bench by the stream, scribbling a few lines into her notebook, though her eyes often drifted to Kira and Ranger. When Kira noticed, she smiled and called out, You writing about me again, Brooks? Maybe, she said, smiling, or maybe just trying to capture what peace looks like. Kira laughed lightly. Good luck with that. Near the stream, Ranger suddenly perked up, tail wagging. A child, a little boy with sandy hair and freckles, had wandered close, clutching a bright green ball. His mother, a tall woman in a brown coat, called softly, Tommy, don't go too far. But the boy only giggled and tossed the ball. It bounced once on the grass and rolled toward Kira. Ranger, ever alert, darted forward, caught it in his jaws, and trotted back, not to Kira, but to the boy. He dropped it at the child's feet, tail swaying. The boy looked surprised, then delighted. He threw the ball again. This time farther. Ranger bounded after it with a joyful bark, snowmelt water spraying beneath his paws. Kira watched them, arms crossed, a faint smile tugging at her mouth. The sunlight broke through the trees then, casting golden shafts across the field. The dog shimmered in motion. Veterans laughed freely, and the wind carried the scent of spring across the sanctuary. Chloe walked up beside her, her voice soft. You ever think about how far you've come? Kira didn't answer right away. Instead, she picked up the green ball when Ranger returned and threw it again. High, spinning, bright against the morning sun. The shepherd sprinted after it, strong and sure, tail sweeping through the air. Kira exhaled slowly, feeling the warmth on her skin. I used to think survival was about staying alive, she said. Now I think it's about learning to live. Chloe smiled. And you're doing that? Kira nodded, one morning at a time. The sunlight slipped between the pines, golden and gentle. Ranger caught the ball and ran back, his tail waving proudly. Kira bent to meet him halfway, laughter breaking free. Around them, the garden glowed, a place not of endings, but of quiet beginnings. For the first time in a long time, Kira didn't feel like a woman haunted by the past. She was simply alive. Sometimes miracles don't arrive in blinding light or thunderous revelation. They come quietly in the wag of a dog's tail, in the forgiveness we give ourselves, in the courage to wake up and try again. Kira and Ranger's story reminds us that God's grace often hides in ordinary days, waiting for hearts willing to see it. No matter where you are, no matter what you've lost, there's a second chance written for you, too, if you let faith lead you home. If this story touched your heart, share it with someone who needs a little light today. Leave a comment below, subscribe for more stories of hope, and may God bless you and those you love, now and always.